Greetings, friends. I'm Vitaly Portnikov. The press secretary for the president of Russia, Dmitry Peskov, has effectively rejected the proposal from former American President Donald Trump to end the Russia-Ukraine war at the line of contact between Russian and Ukrainian troops. Following a phone conversation with the Russian president and discussions with the Ukrainian president, Donald Trump repeatedly revisited and promoted exactly that kind of solution, advocating for the conclusion of the Russia-Ukraine war, both through his social media posts and in television interviews. He consistently stresses that Russia and Ukraine need to cease hostilities precisely at their current positions, to end the war, for both sides to return home, and then to proceed to regulate the relationship between themselves. This is quite a well-established approach. In essence, the exact same approach is now being employed in the Middle East. And one can say that Donald Trump has consistently adopted precisely this approach in his interactions with Putin practically since the initial moments of his presidency. He has maintained this stance from the very beginning of his term in office. Thus, the disagreements here aren't even about the specific locations where the Russian and Ukrainian troops will be positioned, but rather about the precise sequence of actions, as Peskov himself indeed pointed out. Trump consistently emphasizes that both Russia and Ukraine need to cease hostilities at the line of contact between the troops and subsequently continue negotiations for the normalization of their relations. However, Putin insists that what is truly needed is not merely a ceasefire, but rather what he refers to as a comprehensive peace. Not even simply between Russia and Ukraine, but instead between Russia and the West. And if this comprehensive peace, which includes security guarantees for Russia, is successfully achieved, then it will be possible to stop the hostilities. It is worth recalling that Trump suggested the idea of a ceasefire to Putin as early as his very first telephone conversation with the Russian president, and Putin rejected his offer without hesitation. And Donald Trump heard precisely these kinds of rejections from Putin during virtually every phone conversation they had, and also during their meeting in Alaska. However, it was precisely following this specific summit that the American president began to speak about the possibility of reaching the signing of a peace agreement that would not only regulate but also encompass all aspects, a ceasefire along the Russia-Ukraine war front. He essentially agreed to the proposals put forth by Putin. At the same time, Trump changed his rhetoric regarding Russia. He began to threaten Moscow by offering to supply Ukraine with long-range missiles and by implementing high tariffs against countries that persist in buying Russian oil, and in doing so, in a way that effectively assists the Kremlin in continuing the Russia-Ukraine war against our country. It is quite apparent that it was precisely these threats from the American president that compelled the president of the Russian Federation to resort to an already tested weapon, a fresh telephone conversation with Trump. Following this call, the American president gained the impression that Putin was more inclined towards peace than he had been in the recent past. And in order to finalize these arrangements and put them into effect, it is necessary for them to reconvene, on this occasion in Hungary's capital city. And just in these coming days, United States Secretary of State Marco Rubio and the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, Sergei Lavrov, are supposed to prepare the agenda for that second meeting between the American and Russian presidents, which is expected to occur after Trump's return to the White House. However, Peskov's statement suggests that the Kremlin's approach to resolving the situation with the Russia-Ukraine war has, in practical terms, not changed, not an iota. Peskov emphasizes that Russia will uphold the principle of a specific sequence of actions, which means that a peace agreement must first be reached. a peace agreement and only then discuss the issue of a ceasefire on the front lines of the Russia-Ukraine war. And we all perfectly understand that negotiations for a peace agreement could potentially span not just months but even years, and might only be finalized after Donald Trump's presidency in the United States has ended. This outcome, as we've all come to understand, clearly doesn't align with the American leader's interests. This, obviously, is not in the interest of the American leader, as we all know. Seen, he is keenly interested, if not in winning a Nobel Peace Prize, then at the very least in cultivating the reputation of a peacemaker, someone capable of successfully resolving even the most intricate conflicts. And here, of course, the most important question is what Putin is hoping for. If his dialogue with Trump will once again conclude with the understanding that the Russian president is ignoring any proposals from the American side and is merely trying to drag out time so that he can continue the Russia-Ukraine war under comfortable circumstances without new sanctions and without new weapon supplies. For our country to continue the Russia-Ukraine war, thereby fulfilling his plan. This plan involves maintaining the status quo in this conflict while Donald Trump is in the Oval Office. Donald Trump has already been asked how he feels about the obvious fact that the Russian leader is simply trying to drag out time, taking advantage of his presidency and apparently his lack of understanding of the current situation. But Trump confidently responded to reporters that not only Putin, but other people as well, had tried to drag out time with him, and he always managed to handle it. Well, we'll see how it plays out this time around, especially as we've already had conversations even before. During Marco Rubio's conversations with Lavrov, a distinctly clear statement of the Kremlin's position was presented. This stance remains unchanged from what Putin has upheld, not just in the concluding months of Donald Trump's tenure in the Oval Office, but throughout many preceding years. It can be said that, based on the well-known proposals from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation to the United States Department of State and the foreign policy agencies of NATO member states, these proposals actually preceded the start of the full-scale Russia-Ukraine war and had specifically demanded from the West to abandon any possibility of NATO expansion and to a reduction of its military presence in the countries of Central and Southern Europe that acceded to the North Atlantic Alliance subsequent to 1997. Well, here, Trump will either be compelled to return to using tough rhetoric against the Russian president, or he must begin to take real and concrete actions that will force Putin to consider not how to simply drag out time, but rather how he can genuinely end the Russia-Ukraine war. Thank you, friends. Please stay on this channel, subscribe, and follow my social media and Patreon to support these resources. Use YouTube's sponsorship feature. I wish you victory and peace. Good luck.